Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just quickly get in. Leon, could you just nod if you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you
Excellent,
perfectly.
cool, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to join us for today's roundtable discussion. We're going to try and make it as engaging as possible and welcome your participation, please. Big thanks to our panelists today, who will introduce themselves shortly. As some quick backgrounds, first of all, I'm Nick Johnson. I'm CEO and co-founder here at Software 2. I'm at our office just outside Leeds. Today, I would say sunny Yorkshire. I guess it is sunny, but crisp and cold. Although I do travel extensively visiting our customers around the world. I must admit, I've lost count now of how many universities I've met face to face. I believe I'm at about something like 400 institutions across 20 countries. It fascinates me the similarities in the problems across these sites, and that's what we love, I think, about higher education, is the collaboration in solving problems that you don't often see in other sectors. So we're pleased today to come together to share some ideas and best practices. I'm hoping that most people on the webinar have heard of Software 2, but just in case, we are the developers of AppsAnywhere, which is a platform for universities to provide access to software for their students and staff, effectively a single pane of glass from where people can consume the resources. We work with about 250 universities around the world. I know there's a high percentage of people on here today from the UK, and we work with about 50% of those institutions in the UK. That's me. I'll hand you over to Leon, who will introduce himself and a bit about the webinar for today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. So yeah, my name is Leon Walsh. I'm VP of Business Development here at Software 2. I'm in my 9th year at Software 2, here responsible for European business development. So the COVID pandemic, forced the vast majority of higher education providers to assess their current use of the technologies and quickly adapt to something more suited to their student needs. So today's session is really to gain some insights about how 4 leading universities in Europe have overcome some challenges caused by the pandemic, and indeed what challenges are left to overcome moving forward. So I'll quickly run through the topics for today, and then we can open up for our first discussion. The topics include impact around digital strategy, remote learning, the organisation of exams in effective ways, monitoring student engagement and how that can inform its assessment, the status of overseas students and the longer term effects of the pandemic. So before we kick off the session, I'll get our 4 universities to introduce themselves. We'll probably start with you, Steve.
Sure, no problem. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Britton. I'm the Head of Enterprise Collaboration, part of IT Services for Kingston University. Kingston University is situated just towards the southwest of London in the UK. We have approximately 19,000 students, of which about 5,000 are considered non-UK. And those students are split across 4 different faculties at the university and also located across 4 different main campus teaching sites. We have about 2,000 or so academic and professional support staff to look after all of those students. And according to the latest Guardian University Guide, we're ranked in the top 50 universities.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. Moving on to Arndt.
Okay, it's the NTNU of Norway, a very technical and natural science focused university with 42,000 students. Spread across 3 cities, and I think it's 11 campuses. So we have about 15,000 pieces managed by the university and 1,000 on-site servers, something like that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Arndt. Moving on to Magnus.
All right, thanks, Leon. Hello, everyone. I'm Magnus Svendsen-Nerheim. I work as the EdTech coordinator here at the University of Bergen on the west coast, situated here. I guess as a sort of brief introduction, about 20,000 students here from all types of disciplines. We've been rather fortunate to work with digitization of teaching and learning for quite some time, and that sort of gave us a head start when it came to COVID. And we're working with software too for sort of how to integrate application delivery into our learning management system and assessment processes since 2019. And I guess in terms of things that we'd like to discuss later, we're happy, sort of the big things for COVID on our end. We're happy we predicted a full lockdown 72 hours ahead of it actually happening. So we had a head start. And I guess our good collaborative efforts between ourselves and the university pedagogues and the IT department. So we had a holistic approach to how we could digitize during COVID. I'm sure we'll elaborate on that later.
Awesome. Thanks, Magnus. And finally, Rune.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rune Pettersen, and I'm in the IT department of University of South-Eastern Norway, which is a fairly new university. 3 old high schools, what's it called? University colleges merged. I'm a client guy, and I've been a client guy for 25 years. And AppsAnywhere has been with us for almost 6, I think. We have been so fortunate as to we have had a head start with the remote learning as well, and been doing research on it for many years on one of the faculties. So we were prepared for remote learning, just had to scale up.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So I guess we'll get straight into it by posing the first question to all of you, and that's how did COVID-19 impact on your digital strategy? Who's going to be first to?
It's sped it up. Oh, Steve, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Magnus. I think for us, it just accelerated the journey we were already on at Kingston. We've been with AppsAnywhere since its product launch, and it's formed a bit of a pillar for our digital strategy, which is effectively a university without walls. It's about students being able to access all the applications from anywhere, from any device. And pre-pandemic, you could argue it was probably slow in its uptake because we consider ourselves a sticky campus. We like to have the students on site, but it was still there as a pillar to help the students with their journey outside the university as well, where they can still pick up skills and do things themselves at their own pace. So I think the pandemic has really helped accelerate that, and it's really brought AppsAnywhere to the fore for us in how we provide our digital services to students.
I think I'll just follow up on that. I think it's quite a bit of the same story here in terms of accelerating it for sure. We are a bring your own device campus, so definitely having the students with their own devices at home was definitely necessary to provide applications. But also adding new tools to the toolkit as well, not outside of sort of normal application delivery, but realizing that we need to bring in some new tools. We didn't have Zoom. We had it after 4 days, thankfully. But sort of realizing and rethinking how we do teaching and learning with these new digital tools as well has been something that's been greatly appreciated, and also the digital competencies of both teachers and students has greatly arisen, which poses some new challenges, I guess, in terms of digital strategy.
Cool, thanks, Magnus.
As for strategy, we didn't change much, except that adopt the Norwegian strategy for flexibility and digitalization. The hardest part was probably getting all the teachers up to speed. Remote tools we already had.
Yeah. Well, we are, at least in Norway, a large university. So talking about one strategy may be overstretching it. We have several strategies depending on whom you are talking with. But certainly all tools supporting the lockdown, because Norway was completely locked down from the 12th of March 2020, was indeed a kind of using whatever you have beforehand and considering what to add to that toolbox. And certainly for us, we did expand the use of Teams, for instance, an explosion completely. The number of meetings being 8 times as great a couple of months after the 12th of March. as well as a increased use of Zoom, a competitor to Teams, you could say. But then again, being championed by another group within the NTNU. So we have this kind of friendly competition. And but a very strange phenomenon was the decline in use of traditional farms and VDI technology, which had gone on for several years before the pandemic struck us. And supposing it should go upwards and compensate using that technology, it did continue to decline. So I suppose that other tools have supported them, or that local installation, etc., has been somewhat of an issue. So this certainly brought us forward to getting into a pilot now in March 2021. So a hugely successful pilot, I would add. So this is indeed one of the new tools added during the pandemic. So, and but now again, we're talking about technology. It's also a matter of people, psychology, how they tend to either use or discard the tools coming in the way. And this is something that we have been studying a lot. So, and now after the pandemic, or at least at the when the pandemic is declining in significance, we have a small and slight tendency backwards, but within some groups or circles of people. They say that, okay, students now don't show up in the lectures. They prefer to have the flipped classroom kind of thinking. So they tend to be disengaging the lecture, because without students in the lecture halls, whom are they lecturing to? So it came abruptly. It has brought some lasting changes, but coping with the human factor is indeed difficult and challenging. But it's a lasting effect. Yes, certainly it is.
Thanks, everyone. Next question, I kind of relates in a little bit. I wanted to talk about students and about them adapting to a new way of learning or a new model. Magnus, you nodded then, so I'm going to use that as a chance to jump on you first, if I can, please.
In terms of students navigating the new world, I think everyone was sort of students and teachers alike were sort of in a crisis mode for the first year, and just trying to make everything work. And I think it's sort of building a little bit on what Arnt said, but I think we're sort of starting to realize there's a new pedagogy happening in terms of how we need to progress with this. And I don't think we've seen the end of it. A lot of the discussions that's happening here is that should we go back to our normal campus teaching? We're experiencing, I guess, a bit less of students disappearing from campus now. So our campus is still sticky. The students are still here. But how do we utilize the experiences from COVID in terms of having the flexibility of teaching remote and sort of doing the flipped classroom, which clearly promotes learning more than the traditional lecture series, a final exam at the end, some pedagogy suggests. But I think students, or at least are more than happy to come back and sort of have the normality and having the communities around there, because having the digital communities during the COVID lockdown, especially in small student apartments, perhaps 4 people sharing a small flat and such, we're coming back and having a real on-campus experience. I mean, we're a full physical campus, so it's we don't have the experiences perhaps others have with digital learning communities. And that's a challenge that one we perhaps need to address if we want to go in that direction.
But then again, one might add that this is indeed the cost of success. Our digital transformation was so successful that we have to cope with some of the side effects.
You mentioned, we talked earlier that the results have risen during the pandemic. That's a positive effect, of course, which I think might be attributed to flipped classroom adaptation. But the mental state of a lot of the students has declined. So we actually ran social events in teams. We had the student priest doing mindfulness, similar things, online concerts. So it's a successful story, but you need to combine it with a social aspect as well.
Absolutely. Steve, anything to add?
Well, I need to really agree and empathise with what the guys have said so far. I mean, it's been a similar story at Kingston, and actually, what we're seeing now, I think, as we hopefully come out of kind of formal lockdowns and things, although that's quite topical at the minute, I think we're seeing that academics are starting to reevaluate actually some of their content and how they intend to teach it, and I think we will end up in continuing a hybrid approach to how we do things, but we still maintain the vast majority is sticky. We want it to be on campus, we want it to be interactive in person, but then supplemented quite nicely with these new digital tools and capabilities that we've all had to adapt to. There is an element of fatigue, I think, around the online teaching space. I think people are a little bit sick of Teams calls and Zoom calls and everything else. So finding that right balance, shifting from one end of the spectrum to the other and settling back into the middle somewhere, I think is where we will inevitably end up. But I think it's been a really good push for digital technology and the way in which we can bridge gaps that otherwise were seen too fast, whether that's traveling to different places and trying to fit too many meetings into one day. All of those things have become, they've all disappeared. It's become much easier to manage, and actually we've seen some uptakes in terms of numbers for some of our university-wide events, sort of festivals of learning that we run sort of once every teaching block. And we may have gone from maybe 100, 150 attendees in person pre-pandemic to well over 300 in the virtual world, because they find it more accessible. It's easier to join, turn your camera off, and hopefully you're still tuning in and you're listening, and being able to absorb some of the things that are being discussed.
Thanks, Steve. And I'll add something else on myself. And I was in a Times Higher Ed webinar a few months ago, and I think everyone in universities should realise what an amazing job they did and the pace of change. And from the outside, we've always felt that universities are innovative, but I think this is the pace of change and what technologies have been introduced during COVID has just really shown what can be achieved, and everyone should give themselves a pat on the back to say, look what we did, and actually how we kept continuing education to students who could have easily said, oh, let's just leave things for 6 months, but everything kept going, and I think that's incredible, really.
Yeah, so I could chime in. Is it okay if I add one more comment? Yeah, absolutely. So, because you brought up the point, Rune, about sort of the grades have gone up, and sort of, yes, clearly we see the same, but there is no really empirical evidence that that's because they had a better learning environment when they were on the digital field. So we're much looking forward to sort of getting more empirical evidence on how we now can use these new digital tools to actually enhance the learning, because setting an equal sign between increased grades equals enhanced learning is difficult, especially with all the other parameters that COVID introduced in terms of different assessment forms and the quality of assessment in terms of teachers also being at home with their kids running about and sort of not spending as much time and doing it in the same way. So it'll be interesting to follow up on that and see how that progresses.
It also might be the lack of alcohol, of course.
Well, keeping on that theme, have you found any sort of effective ways of monitoring student engagement and learning during the online courses? How that can inform assessment?
So we rolled out Microsoft Teams very early on in the pandemic. We kind of pinned our colours to that particular solution because we wanted a little bit more than just a video conferencing platform. We wanted the whole collaboration suite and the integration of different spaces for our students and staff. So we've been trying to leverage some of the Teams analytics that comes out of that particular suite, but also trying to pull through. We use Canvas for our virtual learning environment. So we're trying to build these kind of data models, if you like, pulling in as many different digital resources about how students and staff are accessing our services. just to try and build that picture, really. I can't sit here now and tell you what some of those outputs are, but that, you know, because it's quite a long journey to do to suddenly try and get all of this data out and see where students are engaging and potentially where they need more support.
We have had students communicating with the COVID response team. I think that's as far as we have gone, and the regular student research, of course, which is every semester.
I think on our end as well, it hasn't been any structured sort of approach to the analytics and following up on students. There's some sort of privacy issues with this, at least in Norway, as far as I understand. Sort of what data can we use in terms of actually figuring stuff out about students, and there's been a conservative approach to that, at least from our end. But I know obviously of teachers and individuals who's followed up on their students, particularly. Some have used Teams, some have not used Discord. Let's put it that way. Not to my knowledge. Let's put it that way. But it's yeah, they're finding ways to engage with the students, and we found, especially in the second semester of COVID lockdown, that sort of creating a digital online learning environment with the students, not just lecturing, but taking 5 minutes off and discussing ahead of class or during the break or something. That so creating a community was very important and enhanced student learning, survey says.
There's one issue we had feedback on, the way exams are done. During the pandemic, we have had more in the way of home exams, which is a report. The students love that way better than the classic school exams. And we, of course, knew that from research as well.
And that's really interesting. But any other comments from the rest of you guys about exams?
Well, we had to use electronic exams for all, even those closed book kinds of exams. So, and one might ask, do such exams reflect reality? And some subjects even reverted to the either you've passed or you have not passed the exam kind of assessment. But even so, one might argue that the flipped classrooms do give those traditionally with less favorable outcomes a better chance to learn. To actually ask the teacher, what did you mean with this or that? They don't tend to ask such questions during traditional lectures because it's kind of scary to be there among 300 students asking such questions. So I guess the best ones will fare well no matter what happens. And the middle ones, okay, they follow their suit, but those less favorable do indeed have some advantages, except the social dimension, obviously.
Okay, I can add to that, and perhaps from the teacher perspective on our end. I mean, we've been working on digitizing assessment for quite some time, and about 90% of our written exams were already digital ahead of COVID. But what we saw as soon as lockdown hit is that there is no more lockdown browser during lockdown, because you can have a laptop next to you or a friend sitting beside the screen, and digital invigilation is prohibited by law in Norway. They were very clear on, so we sort of didn't have that route. So sort of following up with our teachers and sort of what should we do, and a lot of them switched to sort of a digital home exam. So it's the same time, but you have access to all the things on the internet. So you have to rethink what type of questions you ask. But it also sort of started a discussion perhaps more in the second semester than the first, because the first was more hectic, about what is appropriate assessment. And to what you're saying, Enriched, as well, is do we actually reflect reality? And do we actually assess that they learned what they should have learned? So we came back to sort of all the way back to constructive alignment of the courses, and saying, well, what is an appropriate assessment method for assessing mathematics or for something else? And that's really sort of been a catalyst, an even further catalyst for us in terms of discussing appropriate assessment methods with teachers. Some now have reverted to going back to the written exam, and I'm all for that if that's the best way to assess what they've learned. But we're definitely seeing a slower uptake in that after the pandemic, as well from the teacher perspective.
Yeah, and perhaps more formative assessments as well, not just summative. So learning is indeed the name of the game, I think. So assessment is important, certainly, but then again, in what context? And we have even considered giving each student individual assignments as well. That would indeed block the opportunity of breaking the rules. Because, for instance, one might generate different numbers. That would lead to different calculuses and perhaps even different assessments or discussions about the numbers. So, but it is complicated, and we did not get far using such techniques in the pandemic. But all those seeds have been sown and indeed being discussed even further. So we have so much to work with in the aftermath of the pandemic.
What is good about those conversations, and we're having similar ones at Kingston, is you begin to question your preparedness for these such events where suddenly you can't come on site for any reason, and we're starting to see now the word digital come out in those conversations far more than they ever have been. It's always been about the pedagogy and about the assessment and about the outcomes, and now actually we've got digital kind of segged its way in there because it's had to. And actually people are finding that there are different ways to do those assessments, and so they are starting to reevaluate those, but it has been a horrible journey, to say the least, because it's not just about making the change, you're effectively changing. If you're changing the assessment, you're changing the structure of the course in essence, and so the number of committees and different things that have to be gone through to verify that that is a valid way to now do an assessment, etc. The hours put into that has been absolutely extensive.
There's been a lot of research on that topic, and most agree that things should change a bit. That one-day examination and assessments are too risky for the student. Oh, the power went out. Oh, light, automatic light. So there's a lot of riding on one day.
Yeah.
Especially now in the cold season.
Okay, so just changing the theme slightly, what do you think that your university can do to affect overseas student retention? So there's obviously been a lot of overseas students that have been affected by the pandemic, and I'm just wondering what your guys' approach was.
So I think traditionally at Kingston we've obviously had our we've had virtual desktops for quite a while, but that's a very expensive model to go down. So using platforms like AppsAnywhere to help deliver applications to wherever in the world, subject to individual licensing on those applications, etc., has helped bridge some of that gap during this time. As I stated at the outset, we've got about 5,000 non-UK students in our student body, so it's not a huge number comparatively, perhaps, but it's certainly not insignificant either. So we've had lots of challenges actually over recent years with different changes to border controls and various other things, and this is just another hurdle, if you like. But I think the value of an education in the UK is still holding its ground in some parts of the world. So we haven't seen a decline necessarily in student numbers being attracted to come to our institution, which is great. But like I say, our preparedness and the way we go about how we provide our services to students has obviously had to come under the spotlight to make sure we're trying to give an equal service, whether you're sat 2 miles from campus or 2,000 miles from campus. So making sure that students have access to all the right tools has become a really critical path for us, whereas perhaps before we've just thought, no, everyone's on site, it's fine, we can all use the open access computers and various things. Now they're having to find access to these things on their own devices. So that really has become a critical path for us actually in what we provide.
Of course, the support has been an issue overseas as well. So making sure all the support staff can solve the problems via the remote control or something is also an issue. Because apps tend to fail at a few clients. Needs to reinstall and everything.
I guess that quality assurance is one vital factor, because any kind of glitch or a lack of quality is enlarged in such situations, because you have to trust every software package that it will work on every kind of device, such as workstations, servers, because VDIs and RDS servers are increasingly important in such situations, because you cannot rely on any equipment on campus. So if your own computer does not work, you are stuck if the VDI fails. So all those kinds of less good quality issues are magnified during a pandemic or other similar situation.
Absolutely, and we saw quite a big uptake actually in things like Office 365 or Microsoft 365 now, because it's browser based, it's largely platform agnostic in terms of its features and how you can access those. I mean, the support is a really good discussion, because we run a service desk Monday to Friday, you know, kind of 9 till 6, you know, standard sort of UK working hours, if you will. But you're absolutely right, where you've got the student base overseas on different time zones. That doesn't really fit the bill. So we've seen an uptake in chat, and we did extend our hours so that staff could use Teams chat and our service tool chat. But we also have Ivanti as our ISM tool, and what we were able to do is put an agent into AppsAnywhere, which we could then allow us to do sort of remote access to devices whilst they're off site. Because we, from a managed estate within the UK, we found that obviously lots of laptops suddenly went off site, off network, and therefore didn't get any updates, and we weren't able to push things to them. So we had to find other ways around that to try and get devices to be compliant, and to obviously have access to various things. So that proved to be a really, really good tool for us actually during the last 18 months.
Yes,
Cool,
I guess size matters as well. In a strategic perspective, one might ask, do we need the smaller institutions? And I would rather rephrase that one as, should the smaller institutions cooperate to have a kind of common service or operations center that could deliver applications and systems, etc., and at least have a common architecture? That is, to follow the same guidelines and to equip or use the same systems in a similar manner, and then be able to help each other in a given situation. It could be rather a local situation rather than a pandemic, for instance, in the future. That might put one university out of service, but the students would still need to continue studying. So more similarities would help them, at least at certain layers of service. And I guess those listening in could post some more questions. I'm eagerly anticipating more questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to pop them in the questions bubble. That's located at the top of your screen. And yeah, Nick, have you got another question?
Yeah, well, thanks, Leon. I'm hoping the guys will answer this and won't give away any secrets, but we know that, as you said before, it's a world that likes to collaborate. Our question is, if there's any initiatives or any projects, or I guess, or any technologies that you feel has helped your university sit above the rest?
Well, like Magnus said, it's the effort already put into remote learning that has helped us a lot.
I think, I mean, we discussed this at least in the Norwegian higher education sector, and we say technology is not a competition factor. The students don't pick University of Bergen, although they should, because we're the best in the country on digitization. but they pick it because we have the specific top communities within research and science, which in whatever field that they're interested in, and we all have our specialities. So there is quite a nice collaborative effort between the universities. But I think you're correct, Rune, in saying that the biggest success factor we have in terms of using technology is that we have the platform to build on. It consists of many components and has modularity. So we can pick and choose whichever ones we use. We use Cultura. I know Enriched uses Panopto. But in holistically, we can discuss how do we enhance the portfolio and try to share some resources as well. Also, when it comes to, I guess, application packaging, although we haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah.
I look forward to learning from you guys with all the integration you have done.
Yeah. And I must say that Magnus and the University of Bergen has done a fabulous job on integrating the AppsAnywhere with the electronic exam system, the Inspire assessment. This is a huge leap indeed. So the NTNU has been using Inspire assessment for quite some years, integrating with the student information system, etc. And it's been a huge success, and we were so glad it was in place before the pandemic. So the exams of the spring 2020 were able to be carried on as usual. So most of the production just carried on as if nothing had happened, to put it in perspective, even though it did require a huge effort from all staff. And obviously on the home front, you had children, you had dogs, cats, you had a lot of mess. But it was kind of, we have a common enemy. We have the pandemic, it's against us. So we will fight back. And it was a huge effort from all of us in Europe, in the US, and elsewhere. But we were the most advanced countries. We could protect ourselves against the pandemic using isolation and still producing almost as if nothing had happened. To perhaps overstate it a bit, but even so, we are proud about what we did. And we're still learning, as Magnus said, about what actually happened. So flexible office hours, for instance, is now a commonplace practice. So we see that people produce as much as before and even more, depending on the kind of personality, obviously. Some of the most extrovert need to have people around them. That's okay. They can go into office, they can gather in student groups, etc. While the introverts can be helped more by the electronic solutions. They can study, they can do really brilliant now during and after the pandemic.
I'd absolutely echo that. I think the biggest achievement has been the human change and our resolve to carry on and provide the best services we can. And you know, as a service, if you like, we don't always get acknowledgement for really good work. We only really get shot down when something goes wrong or the network goes down. And actually, it was our time to shine. And I think, you know, from an IT perspective, we stood up, and everybody's now recognised the value which we've always known we bring, but it's been more publicly realised, which is great. And to see different people around the institution pick up all these different digital skills which they never knew they had and didn't know they could do, and now they're thinking very differently about how they can deliver things and still be engaging and interactive, I think is a fantastic achievement. It shows that we're providing the right services, we're pitching it at the right place, and we're still continuing to help and guide them to add value to their teaching.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. Well, obviously, I'm biased. You know, I think AppsAnywhere is probably one of the best products in the world. But I'm keen to understand what other digital transformations have your schools done to improve the student experience over this pandemic. What's the one single standout tool that you think, oh, apart from AppsAnywhere, of course, that you couldn't live without?
So I think for us, it's probably the Microsoft suite, dare I say it, underpinned by Teams. I mean, Teams has been a game changer for us to not just have video calls like this, but also to have collaborative space using a whiteboard, being able to share files easily. It really has become a very, very good integrated platform, whereas I think before it was quite disparate in recent years. So that for us has really been a game changer, and it's so easily accessible on any device in any location. And I don't work for Microsoft, in case anybody I sometimes wish I did, or if I had £1 for every time I said that, I'd be much richer.
I actually believe it's the combination of AppsAnywhere, Zoom, Canvas, Teams, and the software already available from apps. And well, one of the biggest issues we had to solve was accessing license servers, because network guys were otherwise occupied, as they said. So that's the biggest achievement during the pandemic for us, actually managing to making things available.
I know this is not per se a marketing jippo, and I'm not paid by AppsAnywhere or by the Software2 company, but I think that AppsAnywhere is indeed the most promising piece of software that I've met across for the recent couple of years at least. So that means it's not perfect by any means, but it does have the potential to fill, I think, most needs regarding software distribution or making software available at least to people. So I see so many possibilities. And the company itself is very responsive. They tend to listen, and they will, at least a couple of times, take our suggestions as seriously as implementing them. So I guess it's not always easy or possible to do all kinds of improvements, but it's huge. It has huge potential indeed. So that is something you may quote me on. So because it's a kind of middle layer or adding value to much or most software available here and there. And it's so cleverly configured, so that was indeed important to us in the NTNU, as well as the electronic exam system. So the Inspire assessment is more or less standard now in Norway, and I guess in Denmark, Sweden, Germany, or whatever. So perhaps not known in the UK, I don't know. So we have a very polite audience today, don't we?
If I can chime in as well, the question was the things that we've added, right, Leon? So I don't have to talk about AppsAnywhere because we had it prior to the pandemic. But I guess the 3 additions that we made to the portfolio during the pandemic, which sort of shared top tier, is Zoom for obviously proper meetings, and obviously with an integration to the LMS so they can organize their own teaching through it. Kaltura for the blended learning. I think Enriched posted 40,000 videos in the chat earlier. I think we're about the same level, insane amounts of videos being generated by teaching staff. And then transitioning our backend into Azure Virtual Desktop, or what's now known as Azure Virtual Desktop, previously Windows Virtual Desktop, but sort of scalable virtual infrastructure is part of our on-demand delivery for applications for students. And especially the scalability, the possibilities that we found there when the tools finally started working alongside us, not against us in terms of auto-scaling, but really pushed us quite far during the pandemic in terms of delivering software to students which weren't on campus, but in a secure environment and in a desktop environment, which was important to the students.
Yeah, and of course we have both fiber internet and 4G and even 5G in Norway, and that is a huge relief because all these technologies will at some point require bandwidth. But we did see that Microsoft had some issues to begin with because Teams didn't always work as it should. We were told it's being added capacity to, etc., etc. So obviously it was a battle from day to day. From day to day.
I think we have the same issue in Zoom, actually.
Yeah, I think all the platforms suddenly realized just actually how popular they needed to be, how popular they were, and how much more growth they needed. I mean, a couple of other things we did at Kingston. We have quite a few games labs and specific labs with very high spec devices. And what we what we had to do was provide remote access to those for the students that did have a device at their end. So we had to enable a bit of a cloud bursting program to allow that kind of access. And we enabled brokering to those physical specialist devices in the labs. So we had to try and create quite a lot of compute power, not only on site, but also bursting out to the cloud where required as well. That took quite a bit of work. But we also ran a very quick project for digitally disadvantaged students, for want of a better phrase, for those that didn't have devices or were trying to run some of these things from a mobile phone with, maybe only 1 or 2 gig of data per month. And we were able to provide just over 1,500 laptops sent out to students in their locations to try and help them kind of bridge that divide and be able to access those services where they didn't have a device to do so.
And
Cool.
what I wished we had implemented was the streaming of AppsAnywhere apps from virtualized on server environment, like we will be looking at.
I feel like we've probably touched upon it, but I'd like to go back there because I think it's interesting, and just talk about the future post-COVID in terms of student experience. I think, Steve, you were talking about the sort of the new normal as a kind of a hybrid world, but again, would anyone else like to talk about what they see as the future and maybe what other changes need to take place now to keep students engaged and happy?
That's a big question, Nick. I'll take a crack at it from our end, and then we'll see. I think we're seeing the start of the flipped classroom revolution to some extent, and in terms of what changes needs to be made, we're a campus with all the infrastructure in terms of physical, how the rooms are organized, and auditoriums aren't very well suited for discussions, to put it simply. So in order to make students happy, I think we need to start reorganizing our campus and turn to create more active learning spaces and figuring out how to use this technology in terms of flipped classroom, but also the expectation that sets to students. So students won't be happy when they're told to read and watch the videos and then show up and discuss, because they really like sitting and listening to someone talking for 2 times 45 minutes and then leave. So I'm not sure if the goal is to make the students happy, but sort of working alongside the students to figure out how we can enhance both using technology in the digital world, but also our physical sort of infrastructure in terms of creating better learning experiences in both sides. So, yeah.
Let me elaborate a bit upon what you said now, Magnus, that they prefer to be on campus and see their teachers. That is not entirely, no, it wasn't what you said. Okay, so
I said they prefer the 2 times 45 minutes. If it's digital or physical, I guess I even prefer the digital because they don't have to get out of bed.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that is our experience as well. So and to the obviously the teachers would like to see someone. So I did see meetings where the students simply turned off the cameras, so the teacher didn't see anyone in Teams talking to everyone. And we are also using the Blackboard Learn environment, so with recordings and Collaborate, etc. And yes, the students tend to turn off the cameras, and it's a turn off for the teachers as well. Just to quote my wife, which is teaching in statistics, it's a kind of weird not seeing the students. So she was put off to a certain degree. She did, and she do even continue doing the same kind of lecture now, and it's popular because they can see the recordings, they can talk to her, they have a flipped classroom setting with training sessions afterwards, obviously, so they can talk, and even then on Teams to a certain degree, because we have a certain relapse now in the pandemic now in Norway, several cities going down into partial lockdown. So we are prepared at least this time.
I think the key is to engage the students, not to keep them happy. We have done a lot of recording of topics, which of course is combined with physical or virtual gatherings to discuss them afterwards. We see an uptake on that. Are building a few studios.
I think just to add to that, for us, I'm not going to say we've cracked the virtual world. I think the virtual world is just going to get better. Actually, I think more features will come and we'll become much better at using it in the right ways. And as I mentioned before, I think for a lot of our teachers, it's around what is it I need to deliver and what's the best way to impart that knowledge and engage my students, and whether that's physically on site or whether that's virtually, to save them time traveling, commuting, all those different things. The challenge for Kingston, I think, now is to make sure our physical estates, so our teaching rooms, our lecterns, are they really kitted out to deliver a hybrid and or a virtual session? I'm not sure they are. So I think now our heads turn to that. We don't have lecture capture as such within the university. We don't have all those different systems that are out there to do that. It's not something the university has thought about, but it's brought that question to the fore now. Not lecture capture in its true sense, but a version of that, if you like, whereby we can engage with people in the room as well as engage people virtually, to bring those communities a little bit closer together, same session.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a lecture capture in 118 rooms during the pandemic, based on both teacher and student demand, and that definitely helps in terms of doing sort of a hybrid teaching session. But the question is that how we want to do it? And Richard said, well, you can do hybrid, but can you do hybrid with a discussion across the hybrid border? And that's very difficult. And you can talk about time delays, but time delays of a few seconds is acceptable. What we see is that it could be a couple of minutes, and then that point has been left ages ago in terms of doing that. So hopefully it'll be a lot better in terms of cracking the digital and improving it.
Yeah,
because that's definitely a field we need to improve on.
Yeah, and I can see that the campus plans, we are going to build some new campuses at the NTNU. Then we are more or less counting on that we will reduce the number of traditional data labs, for instance, relying entirely on the BYOD kind of thinking, etc., etc. So still having the lectures halls, obviously, perhaps not obviously, but we are, and as Magnus say, with recorders, so that recordings are the norm and not the exception. And I have two kids as well in the 20s, one with a master in technical cybernetics, the other in electronics, and they love recordings. So it's personal, I guess, but all kinds of research show that student activity does not rule out the use of electronics. On the opposite. So I can see kids and youngsters having chats and communications outside the scope of the education, but discussing topics and learning, etc., etc. And that is important indeed. And being able to share applications and to quickly test them and just see what can we do. And educators themselves cooperating by simply saying this is a link to an application you should give a try, and quickly having the opportunity to do so, for instance, using the AppsAnywhere system. So it may add to a greater cohesion within the educator and the science community.
Okay, so I'm mindful we've got about 5 minutes left. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. I know Miguel's got his hand up there, so I'll get to you in just a second, Miguel. We've got a question from Johnny De Silva. How did you manage outages within your key platforms, especially during exam periods? Did you have any outages?
Not during exam periods, but we had them in the beginning of the second semester in terms of platforms being down. As we already mentioned, a lot of the big providers not really having the scale necessary. I think everyone just wrote that off as that happened and we moved on. We were lucky not to have anyone during exams.
I could comment upon that one as well. because we have massive redundancies in the backbones of the internet, several links going in and out, and at the same at the server side, etc. So outages could happen, but it would be very unlikely. But if they did occur during the exam period, we would have to reschedule those exams, obviously. But being an electronic exam, it would only require that we made a new exam if it was known by the students. But if no one knew the exams, they could be rescheduled. And using the BYOD methodology, they could do it whenever possible for them to participate.
Yeah, we have had to do that and had outages. We are using Wiseflow and not Inspira. They're pretty quick to get things up, so most of the time it's fixed in 5 minutes. They are, of course, monitoring everything.
Yes, and in cases where the equipment, the end-user equipment was unavailable, let's say for 10 minutes, then we would add to the exam duration, obviously. So those in charge of janitoring the exam would have such privileges. Just to add and make a note, it was added extra time for these students because the power went out, for instance. And being heavily monitored, we could even accept or extend the duration manually for a given exam.
Cool. Well, we are just about on the hour mark. Miguel, did you actually have a specific question? I noticed you got your camera on there, so it's.
I'm sorry, it's a little bit dark. I'm from the western part of Europe. We're quite dark here. Sorry. I'm sorry to come to join you late. I had an urgency.
No problem.
The question I would ask is this. We also have some policy to reduce our own computers and to begin using BYOD, but our professors don't rely on students to do their exams and still ask us for computers when they have their own exams. And I was wondering, how do you deal with that?
Well, I can start with that as well. I mean, we're also a BYOD campus, so all the students have their own devices. We implemented an assessment system which allows for the utilization of BYOD, which is Inspira assessment and a lockdown browser, and standardized all types of written assessment on campus as part of that process. And there needs to be some computers there, which is a backup. We have about 300 and we're 20,000 students, so it's quite a few number of computers we need to have. I know our colleagues in NTNU as well you have a computer lab, I believe, but you can speak to that, Enriched.
Yeah, it's 350 extra PCs just for exam use.
Yeah, we have a similar number to scale for us.
Yeah, we also.
But as for communicating with the professors, our headmaster just gave the order. Students have to have a computer and has to use it to participate in the exams.
We also have quite a lot of classes that are done with Linux and some others with Mac OS, and there's where we have more trouble controlling the situation.
We don't do that, to put it simply. That we have different assessment forms which don't need the same amount of control if they use those types of OSs on our end, at least.
Yeah, we have a combination of BYOD, but also different computer labs that can be booked for that exact purpose, as well as a whole host of devices that can be loaned out to students. So we have a mixture of solutions to try and solve that.
Yeah, and in Linux as a topic, I guess changing the exam form should be considered.
I would like to add something. That is, the combination of AppsAnywhere and Inspire Assessment is really a blockbuster. This could be the one compelling reason why we should use AppsAnywhere, because you can lock down the computer and you can offer one kind of software or two. For example, let's say a programming tool to those doing IT studies, so that the end result could be a file being uploaded automatically into the assessment system, as for the educator or whoever to see through and giving grade. So that is something I have said to anyone willing to listen, that this is indeed a single compulsing reason to use AppsAnywhere in addition to anything else it does offer. Because you can lock down and offer one piece of software being controlled by us.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. And I know we'd probably all like to keep on talking, but I'm conscious we've just rolled past the hour. So if anyone does have any further questions, feel free to keep using the chat or through the contact details, message any of us. And I know all the guys from the institutions will always be happy to answer and collaborate and get back on calls to people if you'd like to. But I guess, firstly, thanks to everyone for attending. Thanks to our panelists. I feel like I should also say apologies that we don't speak Norwegian, because your English is exceptional, and thank you very much for making the effort to join us. So yeah, thanks guys. Thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a good one.